Rob Atkins, and
Green is on. I'm President of Information Technology Innovation Foundation. I want to welcome you to, I think, a really great event this morning to hear from the team at the FCC National Broadband Strategy that's focusing on what has been termed national purpose issues. In other words, ultimately, we don't really care about broadband for broadband's sake. What we care about it for is what it can do for us. And there's a whole array of applications and uses, including education, energy, healthcare, jobs, empowerment, and that's really what we're going to be focusing on today. Before I introduce everyone and Blair, I just want to make just a couple of comments. One is, I don't know what is in the plan, but we're doing a lottery of drawing later, and the winner will get the copy of the plan this afternoon. PDF, and then you can sell information to investment banking firms. But what I do know is the process of the plan, and I hear rumors like we all do. And I have to tell you, I'm so impressed with the process. I'm so impressed with Blair's leadership on this. I remember one morning going to work maybe 4 or 5 months ago, and for me it was early, at 7 in the morning when I got to the metro, and I run into Blair, and Blair, what are you going to work so early for? And he goes, oh, it's late for me. I'm usually at 6, and I guess getting home at 10, including weekends. So I just commend Blair and his team. Blair brought in a great team of folks, many of them with really deep private sector experience in technology or in other parts of government. And the process was open. They had probably, I don't know, how many workshops? 36 workshops, lots and lots of commissioned reports. This really, I think, is the most comprehensive effort in a technology policy area probably that the government's ever engaged in. And so I really commend Blair and the team for doing such a great job on it. The second thing I would just add is I am sure that the sparring and the debating is already occurring, and it's going to just get even hotter and even heavier next week. And I'm sure there are things in the plan, there may be like one thing in the plan that we don't even agree with. But I think overall, I would just encourage everybody to really focus on the parts that we can all agree with, because I think there's a real opportunity, a window here for the next 12 months for us to come together as a policy community, even though we certainly have differences in some areas, and really push what the team is doing where we can get consensus on. I think if we did that, if we just could get 50% of the plan implemented, it would be a huge step forward, and really, I think, a significant thing to kind of break some of the tech policy logjam that we have in Washington. So that's my overall comment. Let me start by introducing Blair, and we'll just introduce everyone else. Blair, everybody should know Blair, director of the Broadband Task Force. Prior to doing that, he was with the Stifel-Nicholas research team, and including before that, like Mason, and then was chief of staff for Chairman Reed Hunt at the FCC in the 90s. And I'm not going to read everybody's bio because we have a long panel, so I will, and Blair will talk just for a few minutes. He has to leave, but he can take probably 2 questions. And then after that will be Kristen Kane. Kristen is the National Purposes Director of the task force. Before joining that, she was CEO of a new media company in New York City that she restructured and helped sell, and was previously COO of the New York City Department of Education. And then, just go, Eugene Huang is Government Operations Director for the National Broadband Task Force. Before that, he was a senior advisor, he is a senior advisor currently to the CTO in the White House, Anish Chopra. He was also, in his past experiences, he was Secretary of Technology under Governor Mark Warner. Elena Berkowitz is the Economic Opportunity Director, National Broadband Task Force. Wide background, including some time at McKinsey and Google. She also has an MPA and an MBA at Harvard Business School. Dr. Mohit Kaushal is the Director of the Healthcare portion. Prior to joining FCC, he was an investment professional at Polaris Venture Partners, which where he focused on investments in life sciences. Polaris is a Boston VC firm. Steve Midgley is the Education Director. Prior to Joining that, he was the principal of Mix Run, a technology consulting firm, and they included projects working with the California Department of Education. Nick Sinai is the Energy and Environment Director. Also, prior to joining that, he was a former venture capitalist and entrepreneur, and involved in several technology, clean energy companies in the Boston area. Did I miss anybody? Jennifer, sorry. I'm sorry. Jennifer, apologize. Jennifer is the Deputy Bureau Chief in the Public Safety Bureau at the FCC. She also previously worked as principal at ZCOM Strategies, where she was a consultant on telecom regulatory policies, and was also Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at SkyTerra Communications. So with that, Blair, you want to set it up for us?
Right. Thank you very much, Rob. And I unfortunately have to go back from continuing the job of proofing the document and a few other. We are in the period of somewhat mundane but nonetheless important tasks. But I wanted to say three thank yous. First, I want to thank Rob and this group. We had to do this project very, very quickly. But we could not have done it as quickly as we did without the great intellectual groundwork that a lot of people in the policy community have done, but particularly Rob, your foundation, the work that you've done. We read it all very early on. It really helped create the framework, and I think that kind of trying to be simultaneously visionary and practical, you guys did that really well. Graham Richards is here. I'm very glad to see Graham here, who was also a great inspiration to us. His leadership as Mayor of Fort Wayne is the kind of leadership we hope comes out of this plan. People are both visionary and practical. The second thank you is really to Christian and the team she assembled. There was that famous joke from John Kennedy when he hosted a dinner of Nobel Prize winners at the White House that this is the greatest collection of intelligence ever to have dinner together in Washington, D.C., with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone. I don't know that you all rise to the Jeffersonian level, but nonetheless, the greatest joy of the last 200 days for me, even though they were all very long days, as Rob mentioned, really has been working with this group. Kristen Kane in particular took on this really impossible assignment of trying to organize all these different, very disparate work streams, but put them together in a coherent fashion. And country owes her a great debt of gratitude. I'm very, very grateful. I also want to mention a couple of other staff, like John Corrigan, Louis Stoley from Q, Kevin Bennett, Michelle Boshi. We have a number of folks who really contributed to this, and just really enormously grateful for the work they've done. I did get there early every day and stayed late, but I was very rarely the first person in or the last person to leave. And finally, I feel I owe something of, it's not an apology exactly, but I just wanted to say this is probably the last time I'll talk publicly before the actual release of the plan. The first time I talked publicly, which was in July, I had a very simple message. We had just gotten in all the filings in response to the first notice of inquiry, and my response, at that point, the record was only 8,000 pages. You actually could read it. I spent a week reading it, and it was incredibly depressing because all of the filings, almost without exception, there were some exceptions, including some from you. They were very self-serving. They were not thoughtful. They were not analytic. They were nothing more than bumper strips and kind of laundry lists of data. They were lousy, and I went up and I said, the filings are lousy, and if this is the best we get, it will be a very bad plan. I just want to say that since that time, we are very grateful that in the 36 workshops and in the 30 public notices we did, we received a lot of public comment that was very thoughtful and very much helped shape our thinking. For example, Professor Fallharber at Wharton sent in a terrific paper on transparency. And later, I think today, kind of some of the transparency recommendations are going to be released, and actually we'll be releasing some applications and other ways of improving transparency for consumers. And I think if you look back to that paper that he sent, you'll see a lot of the framework. Another thing that was just really interesting, and you'll hear this in the national purposes group as they talk about it. And something that was not at all apparent in the first notice of inquiry, or I should say very well hidden, was the importance of personal data. There was like this 48-hour period where Dr. Mo came in and said, you know what? If people had greater control over their personal health data and greater confidence that it would be secure, there's all kinds of applications that could be unleashed, all kinds of innovations. Nick came in saying exactly the same thing about energy. Steve came in saying exactly the same thing about education. Eugene came in actually saying the same thing about people's personal data that the government has. All about incredible new innovative applications, but a prerequisite to it was giving people that control and confidence. I don't know what was in the water in those 48 hours, but it really was a very short period of time in October. And some other kind of academics came in and started talking about it in the same way. And while we did not, we will have some thoughts in the plan about what the FCC can do because of their authority over ISPs and CP&I, Consumer Proprietary Network Information. Probably more so, of course, the FTC. This is really more in their bailiwick, and somewhat with the Congress. It's not so much that we've laid out an agenda with concrete deliverables in the same way that we've laid it out with, for example, USF or intercarrier compensation. But clearly, as we think about as a country moving forward to trying to capture all the benefits that broadband can create, this is a topic area that I think we need to devote more attention to, more time to, and we really need to have an agenda for action. So I think that's just a very important topic. We'll hear more about it from these folks, and hopefully decision makers will understand that that's really a tremendous way of unlocking value. But to unlock that value, we first have to make sure consumers do have that sense of confidence and control. With that, I want to let Christian take my place, but I'm happy to answer a couple of questions if there are any, and then I will go back to the mundane tasks at hand. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. There's a presumption that...
Hi, Mark Cumizo. I'm working on the One Bill project in Somerville with the Harvard Graduate School of Education and Ford Foundation. However, what I'm about to say, these opinions are all my own.
Okay.
All right. There's a presumption that when something big gets started, there need to be rules and structure, and that's obvious. Where there seems to be a failure, especially with the internet, on the commercial side, is to unleash the productivity that's out there. There's not a meaningful way for informal people, really smart, but not parts of organizations or institutions, to contribute knowledge or awareness that's valuable, things that can be done now. We don't need to reinvent things. There's a lot of it out there. There are often single siloed looks at things. So my question is, and I'm working with people to create a bridge between informal and formal.
Yeah.
My question is how we do this with you.
I mean, how do we work as 300 million citizens who can have an organized open source way of being aware of what you're looking for and say, we've got proof that exists out there. You don't need to reinvent that. Here it is, and have other retired people go, they'll act as curators and they'll go, yeah, that's a good idea, and then get that to you in a way that's not overwhelming. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. We probably did more of that in this process, as Rob mentioned, than anyone done, but has done in government. Though I think we're just really starting. We had a blog, we had a website. What you'll see in the plan is we very much in the plan focus on the levers of government. We do not have the view that we can predict with certainty what's going to happen in the broadband ecosystem. We do not choose technologies. We don't choose applications or anything like that. Rather, we say, what are some levers of government? And among the important levers of government is the collection and dissemination of information. And what you're going to see in the plan is calling for certain kinds of information, particularly at the FCC, but in other places as well, that allow information. Actually, the person who talked to is Brennan Richards, because he's taught me everything I know about this. He did it in Fort Wayne. He's doing it now in the private sector, creating certain kind of what you might think as clearinghouses for information and trying to get that dynamic in place. The most important thing I can say, though, is that the plan is in beta and always will be. this is really more than any single recommendation. It is a call to action. And so the process that the plan is leading to is what's really important. Obviously, the FCC is going to have to do a number of rulemakings. We make a lot of recommendations. You're going to hear about a lot of different recommendations that really go more to the executive branch than to the FCC. So there's plenty of time to do it. And the great thing about being in beta is you can always make it better. So we look forward to that. One more question?
What we're not getting more in the hearing. I hope as part of your recommendations, you're going to be challenging the private sector, not just the public sector, since the broadband infrastructure is such a shared resource. And if you're not going to be challenging the private sector to do things that are going to be productive, then what would be the follow-on steps?
Yeah, it's a great question. We debate this a lot internally, and I have to say getting the tone right is important and difficult. Certainly, there are aspirational goals that will be stated in the plan that cannot be achieved by the government. The government, no one should shoot themselves. The goals that are stated are not goals that the government can by itself make real. They can take certain actions, but they cannot. I mean, the chairman has already articulated a goal that's primarily driven by private investment and by the private sector. He wants to challenge the private sector to get there. But I think we have to, I guess I would say two things. That, number one, our primary focus is on those levers of government that affect the velocity of commerce and the velocity of the broadband ecosystem. And that the most important thing is to make sure those levers are working more effectively. You know, we've talked about them publicly. Spectrum management, very, very important to make sure that there's spectrum that's available for mobile broadband. I don't think anyone would argue that the way government does it today is the most effective way. And so we have some concrete recommendations about how to change it. Universal service, very important, not just in terms of how you deploy to the unserved, but also the incentive structure it creates for all kinds of things, and particularly inter-carrier compensation. I don't think anyone would argue that the current system drives incentives right. So we're focused on that. And the other thing I guess I would say is there's a wonderful line from Shakespeare where one character says to the other, I mean, when you're thinking about challenging people or calling for certain goals, one character says, I can call the ghost from the vastly deep, and the other character says, well, so can I or any man, but if you call them, will they come? I mean, the question is, how do you create a dynamic in which those goals are more likely to be achieved? So yes, there will be challenges, but I think that the primary task of the plan is to make sure that when government is doing things like universal service, it's doing it in a way that really does help private investment, doesn't distort capital allocations and things like that. With that, again, Rob, thank you very much for hosting this. Christian, thank you very much for assembling this team. Thank you all. We'll see you later.
Thank you. And, try to get some sleep on Wednesday.
Okay.
So,
Thank you again for having us this morning. It's a real pleasure to be here and out of the building. I wanted to give you a little bit of context for the national purposes work beyond what Blair and Rob have discussed, and then introduce this fantastic team of whom we're all very proud. Essentially, as many of you know, the statutory language calls for something somewhat unique in requesting a broadband plan for our country. And it lists about a dozen or so national purposes, which you see here on the screen. And we organized our work into the 6 groups on the right-hand side of the slide and right here in front of you. And we're going to go through each of them fairly quickly to give you a chance to ask questions about our work to date. If you look at the list, you'll know, those of you who know the FCC fairly well, that the FCC has a really important role in terms of connectivity in at least 3 of the areas, being education, health, and public safety. It actually plays a very important role across all of them in terms of this ecosystem of broadband connectivity that Blair refers to. But this part of the request in the statute really makes it clear that the plan is much more a plan for America than a plan for the FCC. To that end, more than any other part of the task force, our group has been in close contact with agencies throughout the federal government. So a number of the recommendations we make are to the FCC, but many more are to the other agencies and to Congress. We have been in many conversations with fellow agencies as well as entrepreneurs and companies throughout these sectors, thought leaders, many of you in this room, and others. So that's one thing to be cognizant of as you listen to us this morning. You're going to hear from us across all sectors basically three fundamental things. The first is, what is the current state of connectivity? What are the key gaps in each space? What are the real opportunities for broadband to transform the outcomes in each of these sectors? And finally, what are our recommendations to specifically achieve those goals? You'll also hear a couple of common themes. All of our work is oriented toward really using broadband to improve outcomes. As Rob said, nobody really cares about the level of connectivity. It's what we can do with it. And to that end, we're looking at the public sector investments. How can we make those smarter, more efficient, more aligned, and more forward-looking? We're also looking, especially in these sectors, at motivating greater private sector investment. And how can the government really get out of the way and where it is in the way and motivate greater innovation? And finally, unlocking the value of data, which Blair talked a little bit about. So across all of these, broadband's really an enabler, and we think that what matters is that it can enable solutions to really formerly intractable problems. And we hope that you'll find some of our observations and thinking of interest. Very happy to take questions, and it's clear that in this plan we're not going to be able to identify all of the opportunities in the years and decades to come. But we do think it's very important that the country take some steps in the short term to prepare for the future, and that involves making some investment changes, some regulatory changes, and some policy changes. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Manor, who, as you know, is the Deputy Bureau Chief in the Public Safety Bureau at the FCC, to talk through public safety and homeland security.
So first off, I want to start by thanking Rob for having us here today, but also to apologize, because I'm kind of in a little bit of a busy period, so I'm actually going to leave after I speak, but I'll take some questions. So with that, we've had quite an exhaustive process with on the public safety portion of the broadband plan, and I think of the picture's worth 1,000 words. This one is. So today, the current state of public safety communications, whether it's what our first responders are using or whether how just consumers talk with public safety, for instance, over 911 services today, you can't send a picture to 911. You have to call them on the phone. You can't text 911 in most cases. So there's just a dramatic amount of achievement that can be realized through the broadband plan. So this was our picture on that. So with that, let me walk you through the 4 areas that we focused on in the plan. The first was that there exists today no nationwide interoperable public safety broadband system. And interoperable and broadband and nationwide are really the key words here. In that while we have lots of disparate narrowband voice systems, really today public safety has no way to communicate over broadband communications with one another. The second is, as I mentioned earlier, we have an outmoded 911 system. Today, I don't have children myself, but most of my friends have children, and their children all text. And so if you text it to 911, which you might think is normal if you're a 20-year-old kid or an 18-year-old kid, you wouldn't necessarily get through. So, much less pictures. Let's say you were at the LA fires this summer, you wanted to send a picture of the fire, the 911 system couldn't pick that up and couldn't dispatch that out to the emergency responders because 911 systems don't have that capability and the first responders don't have the capability in many places to receive that information. The third area is emergency alerting. I'm sure you all remember what this is. If you're watching TV, you get a long beep and it says this is a message to the emergency alert system. Stay tuned. Once again, this today is really only available over analog technologies, so another area that's fairly outmoded. And finally, critical infrastructure vulnerabilities. And when I talk about this, I talk about cybersecurity as well as communications critical infrastructure, another area that we looked at and spent some time with. So our framework for recommendations was fourfold as well. So the first was, how do you create a nationwide interoperable public safety wireless broadband network? Second, how do you transition to a next generation 911 system? And how do you develop a comprehensive next generation alerting system? And finally, how do you enhance security measures to ensure cybersecurity and communications critical infrastructure protection? So the first one is creating a nationwide interoperable broadband public safety network. And this I actually want to break this into a little different than I have on the slide. And I would say there's really three buckets here. And the first is the creation of an administrative regulatory regime. The second is the creation of a forum for interoperability. And the third is funding. And those are the three areas that we've really focused on in the plan. So in the first place, we've encouraged incentive-based partnerships, which means that public safety should be able to partner with whoever makes sense to build out the network. This network's going to be in the 700 megahertz band, and so LTE is the primary technology that's being used today. And so the public safety entities could actually leverage commercial technology as that's being built out and built out in the country. In addition, in order to ensure adequate capacity, enabling things like priority access and roaming on commercial broadband networks is another key piece of the puzzle. The second area is interoperability, and the working recommendation we have is to create something called an Emergency Response Interoperability Center. If folks think back to Katrina and 911, one of the big issues was that jurisdictions couldn't talk with one another. Even in the same jurisdiction, police and fire couldn't necessarily talk. And so the purpose here is to create a body, and the working recommendation is that this would be at the FCC, to ensure there's a common framework for interoperability for day one of the network, or even before the network starts to be built. And the final piece is funding. This is not a cheap effort, and so there is a working recommendation for both CapEx and operating expenses to be funded. The next area we focused on was the next generation 911 system. And this was one area where we actually had less data than we would have liked. But it became very apparent that less than 50% of what we call public safety answering points, which are the bodies that actually receive the 911 calls, even have access to broadband connectivity today. But we didn't know what it would cost to get access to all these entities. So one of the working recommendations is for NHTSA, which is another government agency, to do a report to determine what it would take to actually get broadband connectivity out, and then have that looked at by Congress for possible appropriations. The other area that's been troubling for developing next generation 911 is that there's a tremendous amount of disparate state and local regulations concerning how 911 systems are operated. So we've also made a working recommendation that there should be a federal regulatory framework enacted to help make it just easier and more comprehensive. And finally, the Commission should also start looking at ways to ensure location accuracy for next generation 911 and what else needs to be done to achieve the goal of having this nationwide. Alerting is another area that we spend a lot of time looking at, and here we're still very early in the process, and the primary area we focused on is that the Commission should establish an NOI and start to look at how to achieve a comprehensive system of emergency alerting. And finally, cybersecurity and critical infrastructure communications, and I think Eugene will probably touch on some additional cybersecurity areas later. And there's one thing that's not on this slide, which is, I think, probably the most exciting recommendation, which is a working recommendation that the Commission should establish a roadmap and identify at least 5 key cybersecurity issues that it should address, and have a roadmap on how to address them. And these are kind of subsets. So some of what we looked at was things that the Commission is doing in other areas but haven't been extended to broadband service providers. So working recommendations include the Commission looking at whether it should establish an outage reporting requirement, or system for broadband service providers. Similarly, whether it should create a cybersecurity information reporting system. We have one right now for disaster reporting that we do in conjunction with DHS, and whether this should be extended to cybersecurity. And finally, voluntary incentives. There's a lot of best practices out there, and what we found is that when companies follow them, they really do help improve cybersecurity. So are there things like a voluntary cybersecurity certification where you get an FCC Good Housekeeping seal of approval if you met certain best practices that would encourage companies to improve their cybersecurity? And then last but not least, critical infrastructure protection. And this is another area where there wasn't a substantial amount of information on the record, but it was clear it was an area that the Commission should delve farther into, so that you'll see some working recommendations on how to improve communications infrastructure and what should be done and everything in that area. So with that, sure.
Any questions for him? Can you wait till you get the mic, please?
I have a question about the funding for public safety. Are you going to be identifying both the amount and potential sources of funding?
Yes on the amount and no on the potential sources. Well, partially, somewhat potential sources.
Any other questions?
Jennifer, if funding is appropriated, and I know you have some confidence in that, and I hope you're right, how would it be distributed? Would it be front-loaded, back-loaded, first come, first served? How do you make sure that it gets out there in a rational way?
So, thank you. That's a good question. So I would break it into the two programs. There's a CapEx program and there's an OpEx program. And in our working recommendations, we don't actually identify which agency should be given the authority to handle the two different funds. But what we do strongly recommend is that it be the same agency, so there's consistency. We've also recommended that any money get conditioned on compliance with the interoperability requirements that Eric establishes, which is another important part. In terms of CapEx, part of that will have to be developed by the grant-making agency, and what we see is, there'll just be certain pieces. It'll take a little while for equipment to be in the market, so some things may have to be done a little later than earlier. In terms of OpEx, that would be a ramp-up process. And so, of course, it's not going to be very much until the networks start to get built out throughout the country.
And is some of the I know this has been a point that a lot of people are concerned about, certainly the carriers. Is some of the OpEx, could that be used for roaming onto the commercial networks, or would that be exclusively for to be routed through the local network and whatever partnership arrangement is there?
So our cost model doesn't include funding for roaming and priority access, though we do have a recommendation that be charged to public safety at reasonable rates.
Great. Jen, thank you so much, and good luck with that. And we'll turn it over. Oh, we're going in that order.
Okay, next slide.
Okay.
Great. Good morning, everyone. So let me just talk a little bit about the work that we've done. This first slide shows some of the interesting devices already out there. So imagine a world where remote sensors continuously monitor you and feed all this data into applications running on your smartphones. These applications can alert your doctor if they pick up the early signs of disease before you actually feel unwell. Imagine a world where you can receive personalized advice on how to manage your wellness and health based on your specific genetic makeup and the risk factors that you encounter on a daily basis. So as a physician, I wish this was reality now, but this world is not that far away and will be enabled by a range of technologies we're defining as e-care. There's an ever-growing array of broadband-enabled devices and applications that are improving the effectiveness and efficiency of healthcare. So for example, there are already over 1,600 health and wellness apps on the iPhone. There are also in-home monitoring devices that enable clinicians to manage their patients' chronic diseases remotely. And as alluded to initially, there's this emerging paradigm of wireless smart band-aids that can monitor people 24/7. So right now, patients are monitored maybe once a week in a hospital, this broadband-enabled paradigm will completely change that to 24/7 and everywhere. And all of these innovations, I think, will be further enhanced by the current electronic health record schemes that are going through. But the important point is that broadband is really the infrastructure which will allow all of this to flourish. So there's a couple of seminal studies in the space which outline some of the cost savings. So one prominent study estimated that electronic health records by themselves have the potential to generate savings of about $500 billion over a 15-year period, driven mostly by safety and efficiency gains. Another recent study examined the impact of remote monitoring applied to just 4 of the most prevalent chronic conditions. It estimated net savings of nearly $200 billion of just avoided hospital expenses. If any of you know the VA, they've actually implemented some of these technologies already, given their incentives. And they've got some very interesting results. They've already had a 19% reduction in hospital admissions for their chronic disease patients using some of these technologies. So we're also in the early days of many of these technologies, but I think innovation in this space is really going to enhance economic growth, job creation, and also improve care delivery. So with a value potential in the background, we slightly try to figure out why is there really poor adoption of many of these technologies, and there's a couple of big gaps, and we really try to tease apart why do we have these gaps that prevent the widespread adoption of these technologies. I think Blair alluded to our process. We've had over 60 stakeholder interviews, we've had our own public notice, we've actually done in-house analytics as well. So let me talk briefly about these gaps. Firstly, misaligned economic incentives. So the current reimbursement system rewards physicians for the volume of procedures they undertake instead of the value of care that they provide. Secondly, outdated regulations that were created for a world where our only interaction with physicians were in their offices or hospitals, not through these remote monitors or video conferences. And thirdly, this all really leads to a lack of data and information access. Healthcare data is often not captured in a digital form, and if it does, it's normally held in proprietary siloed systems. So there's no real use of advanced analytics in healthcare compared to other industries. And then finally, insufficient broadband connectivity. So before outlining our analysis, let me just define meaningful use quickly, as it's very relevant to some of our findings. Out of the Recovery Act came the High-Tech Act, so physicians are eligible to receive up to $44,000 in total incentives from Medicare if they use their electronic health systems in a meaningful way. And this is defined by achieving certain outcomes. And I'll go back to that, why that's relevant, but we've understood the connectivity barriers that may prevent some of that happening. So let me just go through this framework. So the plan's going to cover a wide array of topics and will include recommendations on 4 main areas in order to overcome each of these gaps. So let me go through each one of these in turn. Firstly, to make sure physicians are incentivized to use these technologies as part of their daily workflows, as I alluded to, we really need to reform the reimbursement system. So we can't just change the switch in terms of reimbursement, because under the current fee-for-service, if we start reimbursing all these technologies, it won't be budget neutral. So we have a much more measured approach by the use of further pilots to understand the cost effectiveness and the clinical effectiveness of many of these technologies. But some of these technologies do make sense to be included in the current fee-for-reimbursement system. So we have some added insights on that. As was done in electronic health records, we feel there must be a specific plan of action for these emerging e-care technologies that Congress must undertake. Secondly, for regulations, we must ensure that government is not inhibiting access to care as well as private sector investment in this space. So first of all, again, I don't know the level of knowledge of the audience, but there's certain regulations such as credentialing, privileging, and state licensing that prevent physicians having this mobility by using these technologies. Again, it's very much about ensuring that physicians in a certain state and in a certain hospital practice medicine there. These technologies change the game, and I think the regulations have to be relooked at. And then secondly, there's this growing convergence of telecommunications and medical devices. The smart Band-Aid is a good example. There's real poor transparency on the regulatory framework for this innovation. It's preventing venture capital investment in the space, for example. So this is an area where we're already working in collaboration with the FDA to figure out what is the correct regulatory mechanism, how do we improve transparency, but more importantly, create the right incentives for innovation, yet ensuring consumer safety. And then finally, now with respect to data utilization, and Blair touched on this as well. So the premise of this work is really that the ubiquitous capture of digital data, which is interoperable, creates a lot of value. But then giving consumers access to this data also drives the development of multiple value-generating applications for them. If any of you have been following some of the iPhone apps, I think there's some very interesting consumer-driven healthcare solutions coming there. And we only need to again look at other industries such as finance to understand what the potential is with liquid data. So with respect to healthcare, our first thoughts are how do we create next generation interoperability? Meaningful use is going to do a lot for clinical data interoperability, but if we can extend this to administrative data, payer data, as well as research data, it can create a lot of value. So we can mine de-identified information for new research discoveries. We can also capture the right information to move to this outcomes-based reimbursement system that I alluded to. And then finally, we want to ensure that patients have access to their data. Each type of healthcare data has very specific barriers preventing consumers having access to that. So we have a lot of thought on how do we go through, what's the right framework to ensure that can be mitigated. Great, last and not least is the connectivity issue with respect to healthcare. So we must ensure that healthcare has both access to but also affordable broadband to empower all of these technologies, including the electronic health record proposals going through. Our recommendations in this space are very specific. The FCC has a $400 million a year fund just for healthcare connectivity. So with the understanding of the gaps, we have very specific proposals how to update this. So first of all, the fund is very specific in terms of public and non-profit institutions in rural areas. We want to re-examine this list of eligible providers to determine whether behavioral health centers, even data centers, can be eligible for the funds. We also think some for-profit health providers should be eligible, and Congress should examine this issue. The reasoning is that many for-profit physicians are the only source of care in many of these underserved communities. But these expansions should be targeted and effective. So we want to meet outcomes-based performance measures to FCC funding. Again, Blair talked about this. We feel that infrastructure has to be linked to the applications that run on top that ultimately result in final improved clinical outcomes. Right now, we don't know if that's the case. So the evolving meaningful use criteria is an interesting benchmark that we would like to apply to FCC funding. Our analysis also showed that certain federally funded healthcare providers, such as the Indian Health Service, have a considerable connectivity issue, I think mostly because of their rurality. We've actually done the analysis on what they need to do to upgrade their systems to enable all these technologies. So we do have a congressional ask for that budget increase. And then finally, there was a real paucity of data for healthcare connectivity. When we came in, we unfortunately couldn't find one out there, so we had to do our own robust analysis. But this is just the start. Innovation, as you know, it moves a lot quicker than many of these analyses, so we need to continue repeating these and understanding what are the base wireless and wired connectivity required to really enable these real changes in care. So that's a brief summary. I think we'll take questions at the end. Okay.
There's also some chairs up here. I know there's folks in the back. Feel free to just come on up and share here, and places. And also, we will adjourn precisely at 11 o'clock.
All right, so I'll try to keep these fairly quickly. So this is just another vision slide. I think the slide on the left or the picture on the left, showing a young girl, 15 years old, in West Virginia, who has participated in a school-based program with the National Regional Astronomy Observatory, National Radio Astronomy Observatory, where her class is consuming live astronomical data in partnership with real scientists at a real observatory, and she actually processing some of that data discovered a new pulsar, which was not visible to the scientists as they looked through the data. And she's made this comment that it won't be her last discovery. It may be the first star discovered by a 15-year-old. The entire learning process represents a new model for learning and is enabled by broadband. So her work and her participation with these scientists just simply wouldn't have occurred without a high-speed broadband network. with which to exchange communication and data with the scientists. Moving over, e-readers, of course, are big on the retail market at the moment and certainly hold a lot of implications. And the emerging technologies with the pad-based devices and what the future holds is hard to see. But we know that this type of interactive, highly mobile device will enable students and teachers to interact with course material, to interact with each other in ways that you just can't imagine within the four walls of the classroom that we have today. And finally, data analytics. This is a data analytic diagram that shows interactions between causal factors in education. This type of data you can't get to without broadband networks to create that interchange so that we can, Mo talked about the healthcare system and of course decoding the human genome has been a big effort to enable personalized medicine. This is talking about decoding the education system genome. So this is looking at the large system and understanding the component parts. So this is just some data that we took a look at briefly on the left. Carnegie Mellon University's online learning initiative demonstrated success in a college-level statistics course with equal outcomes, with students investing half the time and effort and the teachers investing half the time and effort to acquire the same amount of learning. Now that's a very dramatic change in the learning outcomes, and of course completion rates were much higher as well. This is a pilot study, but it shows some of the promise to really unlock online learning where students learn at their own pace. They don't wait for the class to catch up, and when they're stuck, the teacher can tell because it's highly instrumented. The teacher can tell where they're stuck and why they're stuck and work with them on those specific issues. So the teacher no longer has to do the blocking and tackling of instruction. They become the facilitator, the coach, and the problem solver, which is really where the satisfying teaching art lies. Florida Virtual Schools is active today in Florida and with some students in other states demonstrating advanced placement scores in excess of the student population in Florida itself. An important point here is that Florida Virtual Schools is enabling students to take AP courses where they normally wouldn't in their home environment. If you have 3 kids ready for calculus in a school, it's not fiscally feasible to put a calculus teacher and a course together in that school. With Florida Virtual Schools, they're aggregating that demand across multiple schools and running full-size calculus courses, enabling students who otherwise would have access to higher learning to get there sooner. So we did look at some of the gaps that are in the way of these technologies deploying out widely. One, of course, is insufficient connectivity. While 97% of schools and 94% of classrooms in America are connected to broadband, the studies we looked at show broadband demand in terms of bandwidth requirements increasing dramatically over the next 5 years. We also saw that only 16% of community colleges have high-speed broadband, which we define in this case as 45 megabits per second, versus 91% of research universities. Limitations in online learning systems and content. While there are some high-quality systems out there, there are some regulations as well as quality issues in terms of supply that are in the way of online learning systems. Mo mentioned some similar issues with regard to doctor certification. With teachers, today, in some states, teachers are locked into that state, and so if there's a student in some other state that wants to take the course that they want to offer, that's not possible due to certification incompatibility. So harmonizing these certifications is a big issue, as well as course accreditation, where students are in a capabilities-based model where if they can demonstrate that they've acquired the skills required to move on, that they can move on and not have to fill the seat time requirements of traditional accreditation services. Limited data access and lack of transparency. This speaks to the decoding of the education system genome. 37% of teachers have reported that they don't have access to the data on the students in their class that they need to teach those students effectively. Data integration is just an extremely challenging problem in any enterprise architecture, and education is no different. One thing that we've seen consistently with internet-based and broadband-based technologies is that data integration becomes much simpler when you have the data interaction occur over a network. So the framework for our recommendations: 1, upgrading E-rate. We also deal with community colleges and have a recommendation which is in the E-rate domain. Supporting and promoting online learning through various strategies and unlocking the power of data to personalize learning and decision making. So I'll run through these in some detail. So with regard to our E-rate recommendations, we've proposed increasing flexibility and bandwidth. We've already passed a temporary waiver, which we will follow on with a permanent waiver vote, to permit off-hours use by the community in schools. So this is just simplifying the process where adults want to take job training courses in schools after hours. It's a zero-cost change, and it provides a lot of value to the community and sets the schools at the center of the community with regard to broadband. We make some fairly technical changes. Some audiences that I speak to have a very intense interest in this. I suspect not so much here, but supporting more flexibility and providing more internal connections for schools. In addition, we propose program efficiency, cutting red tape, simplifying the applications, reducing the amount of redundancy in the application, as well as notably indexing the cap on E-rate to inflation. Right now that cap is fixed each year, even though there's monetary deflation. The program therefore gets smaller in real dollars every year, and we're proposing to keep the program size in line with the dollar that the year is issued. Fostering innovation, this is a concept where we think we can drive a lot more innovation into the program by permitting, for example, wireless connectivity in certain circumstances off campus so that students can learn anytime, anywhere with the devices that are provisioned by the school district, as well as having some competitive awards where there's some preference given to applicants based on the quality of their application, not just for the network, but for the applications that are provisioned on the network. So in the second area, with regard to promoting online learning, one area that we see a big involvement with the federal government is increasing the supply of digital content, which could really change the marketplace for content providers and content editors and the middle service providers. One area that is important is deploying standards to make sure that as content is developed and shared, it's shared under a common infrastructure. And then the federal government can publish its existing resource repository, whether it's Archive, Smithsonian, NASA, NSF, Department of Energy, providing it all under the same common standards framework so that publishers and school districts can acquire that content, assemble it into learning units, and then re-provision that out to the students and teachers. Providing incentives for publishers to participate, and then also simplifying the copyright regime so that people who manage and maintain copyright or create new works have an easy road to contribute their works into education while still preserving their other rights in commercial areas. Second recommendation, promoting digital literacy. The short line here is just simply providing a framework by which digital literacy can be integrated across the curriculum. So this isn't about creating another course, but this is about providing teachers and students with digital literacy skills within the courses that they actually teach today, expanding online learning solutions, removing some of the regulatory barriers that I alluded to earlier, as well as funding research and development over an extended period of time, recognizing that R&D doesn't happen on a one-year basis, but as you begin to develop through ERA and other funds some interesting prospects, you need to follow that on with sustained R&D funding in order to maintain the work that is underway, in addition to considering open licensing for federal investments. And then finally, we looked at three areas for driving improved data personalization and improving decision-making in the education system. Fostering adoption of electronic education records. This is similar to the electronic health records that Mo alluded to. Education is further behind, so we have more work to do, but electronic education records that are secure and private, but that also allow interoperable systems, whether it's a migrant student who's moving from farming community to farming community, and when they arrive at the door, the teachers in schools know what that student's history is, what their needs are, what they excel at, as well as larger forms of data interchange so that we can understand how large bodies of students are being treated and what the effective practices are so that we can share that information back down into the system. Second, developing standards for financial data transparency. So it's not enough to know what worked. You have to know how you funded it. And in education, this is an arcane and technical art. And without data transparency, it becomes very difficult to benchmark the best practices with the effective strategies to pay for them. And finally, a simple service that we can provide to extend the leverage and buying power for institutions where they can publish RFPs on a national level via the Department of Education, and vendors can acquire a much larger body of RFPs as they're coming through, as well as creating some historical knowledge. So that's the set of recommendations we have. For questions.
how can we get the innovations of computing and communications into the world of energy? So I want to put forth another vision slide. Probably starting to notice some patterns here. But imagine if consumers and businesses could not just get access to their energy bills online, but they can really understand and manage their lights, their heating, their cooling from the comfort of their couch, from a netbook, or remotely from a smartphone. And imagine that solar panels and an electric vehicle, as you see here, can provide energy to a home or even back to the grid when needed. Ask you to imagine a world where the grid is more reliable in times of natural disaster and terrorist attack, that it can deliver energy more efficiently, reduce carbon emissions, and reduce bills for all Americans. And finally, imagine a world where new internet-based companies are inventing new ways to manage, store, and exchange energy in homes and buildings, creating not just jobs, but industries and careers. And as a former investor in clean energy technology, I can tell you, I know these companies and I know them well, and this innovation is coming and it's possible. And the government's job is not just to get out of the way or not impede innovation, but we should be thinking about how we can intelligently accelerate this coming wave of innovation. So there's some pretty interesting studies and literature out there about providing information to consumers and how they respond to their own energy information, and putting more intelligence into the grid, into transportation and buildings has tremendous savings in terms of ROI and NPV, and also in terms of the hundreds and millions of metric tons of carbon that we can save. Some of the studies have shown that we can reduce peak demands upwards of 30 or even 40%. It's been shown that simply providing information to consumers, they often reduce their overall energy somewhere between 5 and 15% without any changes in price. So what are some of the gaps here? There's a few of them that we should probably talk about. One is the lack of broadband to the electric grid today. Some of the utilities do have some core fiber, but by and large, they don't have the reliable, pervasive connectivity to the transformers, the substations, and all of the devices through the grid. Two, consumers have a really tough time getting access to energy data. And I want you to just stop and think about your own life for a second. You probably go to the supermarket occasionally, but imagine you went to the supermarket every day. You bought a tomato one day and a beer the next day, and maybe your daughter bought something like a steak the next day, or lots of steaks. And then you get a bill 30 or 45 days later, and it's for $400, and it's not itemized at all. That's how you buy electricity. You know, with very little knowledge about the type of energy you're buying, the price, what the cost is, because the cost is not flat during the day. And consumers have very limited access to this kind of energy data. We also focused on the inefficient energy use in the IT and communications industries, both in industry and the federal government, which can lead here. We've been working closely with Eugene on some of these issues. And then finally, broadband is coming to vehicles, and there's tremendous benefits in terms of efficiency, in terms of sustainability, productivity, backseat entertainment, navigation, but we have to manage distracted driving proactively. All right, so here's the framework. I'll just jump into it rather than read it. So the first one is, how do we integrate mission-critical broadband into the smart grid? And I think the short answer here is that there's no one answer, there's no one solution to bringing broadband to the smart grid. That is, there's over 3,000 utilities today, a mix of investor-owned utilities, municipals, rural electric co-ops. We want to kind of go down a parallel path policy. And so how can we leverage commercial networks? How can we remove the impediments to using commercial broadband networks? To the extent that we're building public safety broadband networks, how can we find ways for electric utilities and public safety agencies to creatively partner together. And finally, electric utilities are going to continue to build private networks, especially for the mission-critical control systems. So how can we be thinking about this in the context of our future spectrum policies? So access to energy information, as Blair and the team have said, this is a pretty big theme that runs through the plan. Broadband is a platform for a new class of products and services in the home, as I alluded to a little bit, but that can help consumers understand, manage, and use energy. And we have 8 million smart meters. These are electric meters on the side of the homes that have some connectivity back to the utility, and increasingly a little bit of connectivity into the home. We're going from 8 million to 80 million, according to FERC, over the next 10 years. But consumers today don't have access to this energy information, this real-time energy information that is so valuable. And they also don't have very good access to historical bill information. At best, it is an electronic PDF, and oftentimes it's just a paper bill. They can't get their energy information in machine-readable open formats. So NIST is working on technical standards, as some of you may know. But technical interoperability standards is not policy, and regulators, policymakers, legislators at the state and federal level have to be thinking about policies that ensure consumers can get secure and private access to their energy data, as well as authorized third-party access so that they can kind of capture the value that is possible from private sector innovation. So with respect to sustainable ICT, there's kind of two pieces here. The FCC can certainly work with industry to think about energy efficiency and environmental impact. And so we have a working recommendation about the FCC starting a proceeding to understand what's going on in this area. And then more broadly, the federal government owns 10% of the data centers, and the federal government can do better in terms of metering, in terms of leveraging its own programs to drive energy efficiency in federal data centers. And then with respect to transportation, the FCC and DOT are working together, and we will continue to work together strongly to focus on methods to reduce distracted driving. And there's really a couple pieces to that. One is better education. Technology is not the answer to distracted driving. I want to be very clear about that. It is one approach, and it can be part of the solution, but it also has to be education, customer outreach, families, and industry. And then finally, vehicle-to-vehicle ITS technology. I know that's something you guys have looked at. This is a technology that can help prevent accidents and save lives. And so we'll have some thoughts about how to best leverage that. So with that.
Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here. I want to thank Rob and the ITIF for hosting us today, because it's always a stimulating experience to come to the ITIF. Playing off of what Blair said earlier, this plan being beta, I walked into a conversation that Rob and Graham were having about the area of government and civic engagement. I'm glad that these robust conversations are happening, because as I'll indicate in my remarks today, although broadband is becoming a transformational platform to improve government services, engage citizens, and increase accountability, this is just the beginning of those efforts. And so the slide that I have in front of you today shows some of the cutting edge and or bleeding edge of what is possible with what is going on. So starting with the far left, we have here a screenshot from Howard County, Maryland. And what they did is that they equipped all 120 of their snowplows with GPS receivers. As you can imagine, here in the Washington, D.C. area, about a month ago, this would have been really timely to figure out when, if ever, your street was going to get plowed. Secondly, going to the right, you see a screenshot from Cory Booker's Twitter feed. Cory Booker, the mayor of New Jersey, earlier this year, a constituent twittered to the mayor indicating that her father's driveway needed to be shoveled. The mayor tweeted back and showed up to shovel the driveway himself. So you sort of think about it, taking constituent services to the next level. Going down to the bottom left-hand corner, this is a screenshot from the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services. And then what they have done is they've started recently providing online tracking for immigration applications, sort of like a FedEx or UPS tracking system. And this is interesting because historically, these types of applications would take anywhere from a year, 2 years, 3 years, but it would be a black box. You'd submit, you wouldn't hear from the government for a while, and all of a sudden a decision will come out on the other end. And so this brings some transparency to a process that historically has not been so. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you see a screenshot from an iPhone demonstrating really the convergence of new technology and the compassion of the American people. What you're seeing here is text messaging donations in response to Haiti. And the White House and State Department highlighted the Red Cross's efforts here. And what it resulted in was $37 million in donations from the American people in 3 weeks. And so we're in the middle of tax season, and so I thought a tax slide would be somewhat appropriate here. And this slide shows just one example of how universal broadband can increase government performance. Although individual paper tax returns cost 8 times more to process than electronic returns, nearly 43% of returns are still filed on paper. And what this has is, what this slide demonstrates is that this is an increased cost to the American public. If all Americans filed their taxes online, the government could save more than $300 million over 5 years, and taxpayers could get their refunds quickly too. So as we lead up to April 15th, I'd encourage you to file your taxes online. You'll get your refund quicker, and you'll save the American people a little bit of money in the process. So what we have, the team has worked on, that has worked on government performance and civic engagement, has revealed 3 gaps in this area in achieving a vision for high-performance government. The first is that government lags the private sector in the adoption of internet technologies that improve efficiency and service delivery. As a result, online government services lag in quality and responsiveness of what you can find from the private sector online. Second, in the area of civic engagement, data is not sufficiently available online today. As a result, citizens are unable to fully engage their government and participate in our government process. And third, in the area of connectivity, the federal government has not done enough to spur deployment and adoption in our local communities. As Rob mentioned, I served as Secretary of Technology for the Commonwealth of Virginia a couple of years back. And so I've seen these at the state government level. I've seen these problems at the federal government level. But really and truly, we are at a unique opportunity in time where we can do something about these particular gaps. And so this is the framework that we have come up with for our proposed recommendations. And I'll go through each of these 3 in turn. First is in the area of service delivery. And what we plan to do is focus on 2 fairly wide-ranging areas. First, in the area of improving government efficiency and productivity, we should look to technologies like cloud computing, competitions to improve online government services using broadband, and greater internal use of social media. The second area is in enabling citizen-centric online services, and we should look to providing enhanced authentication to access online services, to enable individuals to access and verify their personal data held by government agencies, and provide integrated social service benefits online. In the second area of civic engagement, here we examine how broadband can strengthen our democracy by increasing the public's access to information and providing new tools for people to engage their government. And we've focused on 5 particular areas to look for improvement. The first is making sure that the federal government is more open and transparent by releasing government data and information in real time online. The federal government's data.gov initiative, which I believe many of you are aware of, is a great start, but there is more that can be done. Second, we should support public media's transition to digital platforms to create a more robust digital public media ecosystem. Public media has made great strides in embracing digital platforms, but these efforts represent only a small glimpse of the potential that broadband offers. Third, we should implement broadband-enabled civic engagement tools to engage citizens using online and social media channels. The FCC has embarked upon an incredible series of new media efforts, and it demonstrates the art of the possible today. Blair mentioned blogs. We have an idea scale platform that we've used in crowdsourcing bits and pieces of the broadband plan. And the FCC has over 330,000 Twitter followers. It's the third most number of Twitter followers in the federal government, behind the White House and the CDC. So, you know, the boss wins, and people like hearing about responses to swine flu, but it's clear that there's a great thirst of want of information from the federal government from all sectors. Fourth is that we should engage citizens to increase innovation in government. The American people are tremendously talented and they want to serve, and we should figure out ways to help them do so. And fifth, we should be using broadband to modernize our democratic processes. This is particularly relevant for our military men and women who are serving overseas, and we should use broadband to help ensure that their votes are counted. Last but not least is the area of deployment and connectivity. The federal government has only taken limited steps to leverage policy and its presence in local communities throughout the United States to facilitate and enhance broadband deployment and connectivity. Two examples here. First, state and local governments have been able to purchase computers using federal government contracts, and as a result, they've reaped significant savings in doing so. However, they are currently unable to purchase communication services off of federal government contracts, and as a result, we're leaving tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of potential savings on the table. And second, the federal grants currently encourage the development of duplicative stovepipe broadband networks. And so to address these challenges, what we are potentially recommending are to look for ways that the federal government can leverage its assets to help improve broadband deployment. And these efforts fall into four categories. First is to have federal buildings serve as anchor tenants for unserved and underserved communities. Second is to open federal government communication services contracts to state and local governments, just like similar contracts for computers and other IT equipment and services. Third is to encourage greater review and coordination of broadband grants to promote the development of shared networks. And fourth, target federal funding to areas where broadband solutions are outcomes-oriented and holistic. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alana Berkowitz to present on economic opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you again for having us. So here's another vision slide this time for economic opportunity. As more and more American workers and firms go online, we know that the world of work is changing dramatically, which creates tremendous opportunities. And so for the economic opportunity area, we looked at it in sort of three buckets: for American workers, for American small businesses and entrepreneurs, and for American communities. And you can see for American workers, they can start using broadband to support a universe of online job search, application, and training. They can be used anytime, anywhere, at lower cost, and with increased effectiveness. Similar to the studies that Steve mentioned, there have been similar promising studies about vocational training funded by DoD that have also shown that mixes of online and offline training can have increased effectiveness at lower cost and lower time. And here you see an immersive virtual reality training environment for our critical first responders in healthcare. For American entrepreneurs and small businesses, of course, they can be using broadband-based tools to increase productivity, reach new markets, and build new business models. And here you can see a mobile classroom, a digital mobile classroom that's in Louisiana. It's sort of a incubator on wheels, wirelessly connected, that is built to help rural entrepreneurs start and grow their businesses.
And then for American communities, of course, broadband enables regions, whether a Route 128 corridor in Massachusetts or farming communities trying to reach new markets to find new opportunities. They, however, did not get a picture. So, just some context that I think we're probably all pretty familiar with. 63% of workers are now considered networked. They use the internet regularly to complete their jobs. The average worker will hold over 10 different jobs during their prime working years, and there are currently around 14 million unemployed Americans. And so here we see two representations of problems and opportunities that we think broadband can help solve. So here, actually I'll start on the right. For job seekers who require placement and training services, right now, broadband could offer the low-cost scalability and adaptability that an all-brick-and-mortar system can't achieve. So here you see, in some of the biggest markets that have been facing some of the highest unemployment, the current Department of Labor brick-and-mortar one-stop system is only serving in some of these markets 1/10, if not much less than that, in terms of the unemployed in each of those markets. And of course, it's even more challenging for people who live in rural, remote areas where they might not have access to a Department of Labor physical one-stop in the first place. And though we can't always predict where the unemployed will concentrate or what their needs are going to be, using a smarter, more online-based training system and placement system can help us respond more quickly the next time we're facing economic challenges. And then here on the left, in more of a optimistic chart, we see small businesses, some of the benefits that technology can bring to small businesses across different business processes. Small businesses, of course, are particularly critical to our economy, accounting for half of workers nationally and 80% in inner cities, which was part of the reason we focused so much attention there. So the Economic Opportunity team had identified 4 gaps, which I'll go through quickly. First, as we've discussed, the current workforce system relies almost exclusively on physical infrastructure to deliver services. Its services are highly fragmented, and moreover, we need to be modernizing those services to train workers for the kinds of jobs of the future that they need to be prepared for, which do involve a better understanding of ICT, basic digital literacy skills, and those kind of things. Secondly, we know how popular telework can be, particularly for communities that are not able to work in traditional workplaces, whether because of distance or disability or other issues. However, there's a lot of cultural and regulatory hurdles that we still need to address. Third, SMEs, as we've noted, though the vast majority of them do in fact have broadband, as we saw, we did a business survey of around 3,500 businesses, and we know that the majority of them, the vast majority of them do have broadband. However, they underutilize a lot of the online applications that we know can have proven benefits for their productivity and ability to access new markets. And then finally, for communities, they continue to not be integrating ICTs into their regional development solutions in a way that can create more competitive communities that are going to be more attractive to private investment. So this was our 4-part framework, but I'll just jump into each of them. So the first part, of course, is creating a robust, scalable online platform that can deliver employment assistance programs and job training virtually. What we're proposing is a multi-phase, multi-version tool. The U.S. Department of Labor is actually already taking steps to bring some of its services online, which we think is a very positive step, but we're proposing that these efforts should be dramatically accelerated and expanded. So what we are really envisioning is an employment assistance platform that should enable job seekers to participate in all of the various federally funded job programs that we currently have, but they should be able to do it from a home computer or from a public access point like the library, anytime, anywhere, and at dramatically lower cost. The platform would also guide job seekers to pursue vocations that are compatible with their interests and qualifications, assess their own skills, assess their digital literacy skills, their English skills, obtain basic literacy or ESL training. Very importantly, be able to connect with credit-bearing, certification-bearing courses, and they'd be able to manage the job application process online. Subsequent iterations of this tool would be sort of what we've been calling the kind of Netflix of jobs. It would be an algorithmic tool that really helped workers chart a much more long-term career path that could connect them with different kinds of opportunities than they may be able to see now as they progress down their career paths. But the objective of aggregating all of these anytime, anywhere career tools on this broadband-enabled platform is to ensure that all Americans who want to be participating in the workforce, regardless of ability, regardless of location, regardless of financial means, can have a platform that's accessible and effective. So as we mentioned, the second part of our framework is promoting telework through federal policy. Our business survey showed that more than half of U.S. companies do not allow their employees to telework at all, which in some cases has been driven by concerns about cost and security. But of course, as we saw here in D.C. a couple of weeks ago, teleworking and the effective support mechanisms for teleworkers would be pretty helpful next time we have a snowpocalypse. So we know that 34 million Americans are currently teleworking, and that it's created a number of benefits both in terms of personal productivity for those employees, but also in terms of environmental gains and other productivity gains. But these significant hurdles still remain. So we've been looking at a number of options to promote telework. One is the federal government is taking a much more robust look at how we can be encouraging more teleworking throughout the federal government to really become a leader there, as well as looking at regulatory hurdles for the private sector, including double taxation barriers that many individual states who are interested in teleworking across a number of states across the country. So the third part of our framework is about expanding efforts to train and equip small and medium businesses with broadband applications. As we've already discussed, the main barrier for small businesses is not one of access to broadband or an initial subscription to broadband, but it's actually utilizing the kind of online applications that can provide them with the greatest benefit. So to increase business usage, there needs to be improved awareness of broadband's benefits, as well as strong support for implementing these online solutions. So we're looking at both a combination of both online tools and in-person training that can leverage the resources of both the public and private sectors to help more small businesses, with a particular focus on small businesses located in high poverty, high unemployment regions, be able to use the internet to improve their businesses. We're also looking at public-private partnership which we'll be announcing soon, that will provide small businesses with a comprehensive package of training, applications, and technical support, again, particularly focused on businesses in high poverty, high unemployment areas. The programs would look at a range of small business IT capabilities, from e-commerce, mobile application security. It's also important to note here that some of the other things we're looking at is the Small Business Administration already has a nationwide network of small business development centers, a volunteer network, and SCORE. And one of the other recommendations we're making and working with them is to virtualize that network, so that no matter where you live, if you are looking for expertise and guidance in a certain area, even if you do not actually have physical SCORE or SBDC representatives in your city or town who happen to be experts in that region, you can access a virtual network of small business mentors to help your business grow. And then finally, the fourth part of our framework is utilizing broadband to enhance economic development tools and planning. As we, I think, all know, broadband infrastructure can play a key role in economic development by strengthening local businesses and by making regions more attractive for new investments. Today, of course, broadband networks are becoming just as important to companies as roads or power or other infrastructure needs when people are determining where to locate their new operations. But yet, very few communities are actually integrating broadband into their economic development strategies and planning. And of course, the funding streams and programs across the federal government that support regional economic development are deeply fragmented across 26 different agencies and programs, where we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars each year. So we're looking at a number of solutions, one of which is looking at programs like community benchmarks, which can provide comparisons of broadband usage across regions and can give local planners information they need to create better development strategies. We're hoping that benchmarking, which has seen some success from states that have deployed this, can be a strong motivator to local companies to invest in their future by making broadband a priority wherever they're already located. I think in closing, I would just say also, the economic opportunity section is a strange beast in some ways, because it's both its own set of recommendations, but in some ways also hopefully a leitmotif and an outcome of many other parts of the plan, when taken together in their totality, from the adoption recommendations that people may have heard about if they attended our digital literacy summit this week, to lowering the cost of deployment, to the net impact of innovations in education. And so to us, the economic opportunity recommendations are a supplement and a complement to everything else in the plan, which we think really creates economic opportunities throughout and across the recommendations. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We have plenty of time for questions, so but before I do that, I just want to say, I think what you should do on your slide presentation is take all the vision slides and put them back to back. And when you see that, you're like, I mean, I think people, if you're not blown away by that, and say, boy, we should do this. We can do this in 5 or 10 years, but only if we really work hard at it. I mean, those vision slides to me were amazing. It tells us exactly where we could be if we focus on this. We have a report coming out on Monday. It turns out Monday, besides being the day before the plan is going to be talked about, is actually the 25th anniversary of the first .com domain name, March 15th, 1985. And so we have this big giant report coming out talking about this. There's an event on Tuesday at the Reagan Center. But one of the things we look at in this report is who's leading in the world in e-commerce. And it turns out the U.S. is one of the world leaders in e-commerce. And where the U.S. does really, really well are areas where firms and organizations can implement IT on their own. Where we lag behind in health IT and energy, smart grid, e-government, a whole set of things where you need a public-private partnership. And that's, I think, this big next set of opportunities. And to me, that's why the plan is so impressive, because it's really talking about how do we take these areas where the private sector, individual organizations really can't do it on their own, where you need to put everybody together in this ecosystem. So I'm really super excited about what you've all done and very impressed with it. So with that, why don't we, if you want to raise your hand and right here, sir. We're getting more mics.
Hi, I have a question about E-rate program. So you mentioned, you explained, I understand the Commission recently unanimously approved upgrading the E-rate program so that the general public can access the broadband facility of the public school and the libraries off hours. It's correct, right?
That is correct. It's already been the case for libraries. We amended it to permit schools as well.
Yes. So I have then also Chairman Janakowski announced that the national broadband plan should have a rather aggressive target for household adoption rate. Then so I have trouble finding in between the upgrading the E-rate program and this goal, which means, as I understand, the upgrading E-rate program allow general public to access, at school. So it will create a disincentive for people to subscribe, broadband at home. So then, can you respond to this?
Sure, I disagree with that conclusion. I don't think that having broadband at work discourages individuals from consuming broadband at home. And so providing it more ubiquitously, I think, is a good idea and drives more value into the system rather than less. That's only one recommendation that we made with regard to E-rate. So we also have a recommendation related to a pilot program to permit wireless access for school-managed devices anywhere in the community, whether it's at the library, at home, so that the student can take their learning and use it anywhere. So I do think that there's a tremendous amount of overlap, and we're tightly integrated in our work between the adoption team and the education team.
I think part of the question may have been if you raise the E-rate contribution rate slightly to pay for this, that you could have a negative effect on home adoption. I think that was what the question was. So
right.
Maybe you could respond to that.
Well, I thought I did, so I will try again. So the adoption rates at home, I don't think are driven by ubiquitous access elsewhere. So that by providing...
I think it was the cost issue, though. If the E-rate contribution cost goes up, then broadband costs go up by a teeny bit for the home. I thought that's what your question was. So it was more of a cost issue.
Well, that's maybe a disincentive for phone access. Right, that's not...
Well, what...
Okay, Kristen, if you want to try.
I'll give it a shot. virtually all of the E-rate recommendations are cost neutral, so we're not increasing the size of the E-rate fund to accomplish a number of the strategies you heard this morning, with the exception of indexing the cap to inflation, which would still be done within USF, an order of magnitude $50–60 million a year. So financially, I think we're not making inconsistent investments in driving home adoption and also increasing community access. And I think the broader point Steve made, we don't think that they're philosophically inconsistent. Just the more broadband access in institutions, the better. The more home access, the better.
Great. All right, bunch of questions. We're going to go Graham and then
This is for Kristen and Eugene, since you're sitting right in front of me. To the President, to the Congress, and to the American public, what's the most important message that you want to get through from your work? Second part question, what were you most surprised about? What did you learn in this process that was unexpected, that was unique or special?
So in terms of the most important issue, I think, if nothing else, that this plan was written by the American people, and that this encapsulates the hopes and dreams of the American people for the future. So what we are talking about here today is not a plan that is a 1-year, 2-year plan, but a 5 to 10 year plus plan that, from a visioning perspective, demonstrates that America can lead not only in broadband, but in each of the areas that all of us talked about. I think, to me, the most surprising part about the overall broadband plan endeavor that was shocking to me was that there's a lot of focus on U.S. being 15 in terms of speed, or 28 or even lower, depending on the study that you read, or that the U.S. is falling further and further behind. I think just building off of what Rob commented upon in terms of his upcoming study, the thing that impressed me most about just looking and studying the broadband ecosystem today is that it is really strong in the United States, not because the government has had a heavy hand in making it do so, but because there's incredible amounts of innovation that are occurring, both in the private sector as well as in the public sector. And so that, when we look towards the future is very, very bright. And I think that each and every one of us will say that we believe that the recommendations that will come out next week in all the areas, in adoption and deployment and national purposes, will help accelerate and maintain the U.S.'s competitiveness in this area.
Alan?
Thanks.
Go ahead, Alan.
Okay. I'd second your statement about the fact I found this a powerful vision and an impressive national strategy and some real coherence and synergies between the sectors as they were laid out. So next week, in the days after the plan is released, as this begins to get cut apart and parceled out to departments and agencies and authorizing and appropriating subcommittees on the Hill and begins to become just 1,000 different flowers. Is there any thought to how one maintains the actual national and strategy part of this, or is it just whatever happens now, if it advances the ball, it's all good, even if it's mixed across? Is there any mechanism to kind of hold this together in some fashion?
It's a great question. It's one we talk about a lot. There's actually a chapter in the plan on implementation that proposes a number of different strategies that the federal government may pursue to make sure implementation happens in a coherent way. I think you'll see a couple of things. The first is the FCC really becoming a resource to agencies in the executive branch and Congress, particularly with ongoing and renewed focus on data collection and analysis that will help inform the plan going forward. As Blair mentioned, this plan is really just the very, very beginning, and the point is that you don't turn something in and then forget about it, but that the work continue. And I think that you'll see, we hope, the executive branch playing a really significant coordinating role among all the agencies, particularly with regard to the national purposes work you've heard about today.
Okay, I'm going to go in the order I saw them, and I think, ma'am, you're right back there, yeah. And if you can also, everybody kind of just identify yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Vicki Stern. I'm with Think Out Loud Media, and I also wanted to congratulate you on a brilliant demonstration here today. What you've been working on is incredible. My question is specifically on healthcare. Yesterday on the Diane Rehm show, she focused on electronic health records. And I don't know what your takeaway was from it, but mine was very shocking how negative Diane was, and the doctors and people who called, despite incredibly positive presentations from the Cleveland Clinic and from Dr. Detmore from AMIA. So I'm wondering if you're going to make a recommendation on how you're going to present all of this to the general public when there is this built-in fear of a combination of lack of security and Big Brother. And I think your visioning statement, I could see a lot of fear in responding to that wonderful statement, but there's so much, I would call it irrational fear of that piece, and maybe some of the other pieces as well. Thank you.
Great question, thank you. So, just taking a step back, with any healthcare innovation, there comes a phase of R&D and then experimentation. Unfortunately, the experimentation phase takes at least 10 years to figure out whether it works or not. So we can't hold back waiting for that data to be gathered in research centers before implementing it. So that's my first point. The second point is that there's a growing body of evidence showing the positive effects of electronic health records. I don't need to cite all the papers, but we know the savings in prescribing in a digital form rather than a written form. We pick up errors, we pick up interactions. Same with ordering tests online in digital form rather than written. We know that right now we duplicate tests everywhere. So I think the upside value is very well understood. There are multiple concerns. But I think the important point is de-identification for many of the things that we talked about in terms of the next stage analytics. That will mitigate some of those concerns. And then the second point, that the people who mostly complain in the mass population are welcome. When you talk about the chronic disease patients with heart failure who come in and out on a monthly basis, have a terrible quality of life, these are the patients who say, I would love remote monitoring. I would love electronic health records. It keeps me out of the hospital and to live my life. And I think those are the people we have to listen to.
I would add also, we did a report recently called Explaining International IT Leadership in Healthcare, where we found that in Denmark, for example, almost 90% of doctors have PHRs, 80% of patients have PHRs. So there are countries where there's wide-scale acceptance and adoption of this. This is actually why the Danes are listed as being the happiest people in the world.
Chris Kane, a number of you mentioned resiliency in areas. I'm just wondering how much detail will the report give to resiliency and how you achieve it? Because it's an area that really is kind of the underbelly of implementation success.
That's a great point. I think maybe I'll turn it over to you to answer.
So I think the first step is collecting information and really understanding as we move from a copper-based telephony PSTN to a broadband wired and wireless world where there's more IP and voice is just one application. Understanding the reliability and resiliency of these commercial networks, and it's clear from the work that we've done and the record from our interaction with industry and other thought leaders, the first step is collecting better information about the reliability and resiliency. And I think you'll see some working recommendations. Jennifer talked about it in the critical infrastructure.
the FCC in the past has had some challenges in approaching this issue. So getting a more definitive record is the first step, and then kind of take it from there.
Great. I see. Yes. Oh, Gary, I'm sorry. I just assumed you had the mic. Yeah.
Gary Arlen from Arlen Communications. Is this PowerPoint available at broadband.gov right now?
It's on our website. This is on our website now, ITIF.org.
Perfect. And more substantively, of those 8,000 pages of comments that bored some people months ago, a lot of stakeholders, including the carriers, the arms merchants who supply them, and a lot of special interests, certainly have some interests in what happens next. What are you expecting? How do you expect this dialogue to continue with folks who have a big stake in what you're proposing?
It is a good question. I would anticipate, the chairman and his team have been obviously quite engaged in this work and have many plans that will go into effect immediately upon rollout of this plan that will, I think, chart a path toward ongoing engagement and give the community at large and all of the constituents a sense of what actions will be taken when. You saw just highlighted in yellow throughout our slides the things that we recommend the FCC take on. The rest of the plan would be almost exclusively yellow. So there are many, many things that the FCC needs to do, and we've talked a lot about how open this planning process has been, and I think there's wide agreement within the agency right now that in order for implementation to be successful, this engagement has to continue apace. So whether it'll be through new media efforts or continued workshops on policy issues as NPRMs are developed, I think you'll see a lot of what we began throughout this last 6 months of work continue in implementation.
Hi, my name is Phil Macris from Bingham McCutcheon. I want to thank the panel this morning for putting on an excellent presentation. I'm looking forward to next week's release of the plan. You presented a robust new set of opportunities for next generation applications across a number of fields, but I haven't heard much about the network infrastructure that is needed to be able to handle the next generation opportunities and applications and have the capacity to handle these applications. About 10 years ago, we were happy with dial-up, and that demand is ever increasing at exponential rates. At this point, what is the FCC considering doing to make more capacity available to end users and businesses at better prices and with better performance to accommodate these next generation applications? If your answer could just touch upon wireline, the Berkman study, and the duopoly that currently exists in the marketplace, that would be great.
That may be slightly beyond what this team is doing, but if anybody wants to allude to it, that's fine.
I can talk a little bit about requirements.
And then the next question is going to be about net neutrality.
I'll defer that to Steve. So I didn't go into our full connectivity analysis, because I could actually spend an hour on it. As I said, I alluded there was no robust analysis. What we did is exactly what we talked about. We first of all understood what are the type of applications we need to use today, but also what's coming down the horizon. We started to understand bandwidth required to empower them. We started to understand latency, fix and other network qualities. What we then did is we segmented different type of healthcare providers based on the type of applications they'll use, their size metrics, and tried to understand the minimal connectivity required to empower them. Which I can't state now, but Blair said we'll be coming out with specific goals, but we have criteria for different types of healthcare providers based on the number of physicians, what types of connectivity they need, both now but also as you see down the line. And to give you an idea, although just data is kilobytes, if you're looking at a 64/CT, that's 3 gigabytes in size. When you think about genomics moving away from the research relevant to actually clinical practice, that's going to cause an exponential increase in the amount of data that we need to transmit it. And that's very much factored into our analysis.
And just very, very briefly, so we did similar types of analysis across all the sectors on what the actual bandwidth needs were for the applications we described. But more broadly, I think in the plan you see a series of recommendations around the spectrum, which Blair alluded to earlier, some recommendations about competition as well, and overall how the federal government can lower the cost of inputs to help promote competition within the sector and increase deployment overall. So that's sort of a category for excellence.
Lady right there.
Christy Barnhart, Bernstein Strategy Group. My question follows on the heels of my neighbor's question. With regard to a lot of the recommendations the effect of a lot of the recommendations will be the increase of private information online, available digitally. Is there any recommendation or any consideration in the plan about authenticating users, making sure they are who they say they are?
Yes.
It sort of tongue in cheek. There was, in an august public forum. I don't necessarily want to cite the Onion, but there was a very, very funny article in the Onion. I don't know what, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, about Google responding to the privacy advocates. And, Google had a very, very specific response to individual concerns. It's very, very funny. If you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to find it online. But in particular, at least on the government performance side, there is a specific recommendation related to secure authentication. I think that all of us who work in this particular space recognize that if we're attempting to create an ecosystem where data is critical, and that individuals should have access to it, then we really also need to figure out how do we authenticate that. If you say you are person X, especially when it comes to things like electronic health records, that one, that you are who you say you are, first and foremost, and secondly, that you have delegated responsibility and access to those records to your doctor, your family, but only those individuals, and that you have been able to opt into that ecosystem. But even though we are recommending some things, I think that the entire area of privacy, as well as authentication, is an area where there is robust debate going on. I know that ITIF is engaged in that debate, and that much like many other places where there are recommendations, that there is an interest. I would continue to make sure that you follow what goes on.
Just on that point, I'm going to go to Rick. Rick, just on that point real quickly. My colleague Daniel Castro will be releasing a report in about 6 weeks benchmarking what other countries are doing on digital signatures and key authentication. Let's just put it this way, it makes our broadband performance look great, because other countries are so far ahead of us with almost some kind of 100% ubiquitous digital signature capability. And a lot of what this plan is really envisioning, some of those components just simply are not going to work as well without that capability. So it's I think critical. Rick.
Thanks, Rick Zimmerman from NCTA. Building on the question to some extent from my friend at Bingham McCutcheon, I think the proper reference is the widely discredited Berkman report. But I wanted to ask, with respect to public safety communications, or particularly healthcare communications traveling over private networks, whether there's any recognition in the recommendations that there might be a role for prioritization of certain types of communications over private networks.
That was a hidden net neutrality
question. Rob warned you.
Put that in there.
I picked it up. So let me talk about this at a very high level. The question of a dedicated spectrum, for example, for healthcare has come up, and that sort of has some of the same elements in terms of prioritization of data. And there's just generally two schools of thought in this. There's a group which think that certain elements should have dedicated or prioritized information. There's another school that thinks we just have to make commercial networks more robust to allow that to happen. The point is, and this is where I follow this topic, is we have no idea what innovations will occur 5 years down the line. We know what's around now. I think there's huge gains just in, and I alluded to this, just measuring patients 3-4 times a day versus once a week. That's where a huge bulk of clinical outcome improvement will be gained from. 2 years down the line, there may be technologies which will need 24/7 and prioritization. So I think it's more about setting the framework that says we have to relook at this issue to keep pace with innovation. So I think that's the correct way of looking at it, rather than saying, the definitive answer is yes or no.
There's a question here, and then over here.
Thank you. Ann Morton, I'm with the Technology CEO Council. I wanted to go back to a question earlier about how you keep the national momentum of the plan going, and I'm just wondering in terms of its execution across the government, does the plan contemplate, or do you see a need for potentially designating a nucleus of a few people at each cabinet department that are like your people that are helping you implement? And I'm asking it in terms of just whether you think the process is going to work if it's ad hoc, or is there sort of going to be that nucleus of people? And the analogy I'm thinking of, to be honest, is like the executive order on energy efficiency where there's like a chief sustainability officer. And I'm wondering, do you see something like that being appropriate for broadband since it's also a big national goal?
Yes, the short answer is very much so. And I think part of our work has been looking at what has worked in very cross-functional, multidisciplinary, major government efforts that are long-term in nature and how they're best structured. So yes, I would envision seeing a lot of thought leadership at the executive branch level with key designees within multiple agencies working together on making sure key benchmarks are both established and met.
So maybe you can go and be the broadband czar.
Yeah, thank you.
We have time for one last question. Comment.
Bob Samores, Public and Land Grant Universities. How do we catch up to move forward? Lots of great vision. We've got billions and billions of pages of records for health in the health field and education. Is there, does the report address how to deal with that material?
Dealing with the record itself or catching up in terms of our capabilities?
How do we get that existing information into the digital system?
So in the education space, we've been working with various agencies looking at their existing capabilities with regard to digital content. And in fact, there's a tremendous amount of material already available in a digital format with metadata and in a structured manner that's just not accessible on a common infrastructure. So the network can't get to it even though the computers can. And so it looks like a problem of organization for those materials. Now, of course, there's vast stores of materials out on the web that are in a similar position, and there's also even larger stores in the file cabinets in the county offices and school districts around the country. I think that is a classic network problem. I mean, Wikipedia looked like an impossible problem before the innovation of the wiki, and so crowdsourcing some of this solution seems like a reasonable approach if you can drive out the network capabilities to the point where teachers, paraprofessionals, district coordinators can be engaged in the production of learning materials as well as the publishing companies in the industry.
Well, I'm thinking actually more about the education and health area on the personal records, pulling all that material out of those file cabinets and getting it into the system so that when people are moving around and taking that data, they've got the history.
Job creation.
Stimulus too. Well, let me just close by saying a couple things. One is, I think it wasn't serendipity that an accident that they're releasing the plan on St. Patrick's Day, because I think they're all planning to go out and get drunk. They well deserve to be able to do that. So I want to please join me in thanking them for not just a great presentation today, but all of their hard work. I mean, these folks have put an enormous amount of time for the benefit of the nation. Really all of us. I think they'll be here for a few questions if folks want to come up and ask. So thank you all for coming.
That's mine. Sure.